Clearly, she is kind of a stand-in for Anne Rice, and so when you know Anne Rice's own background, the story is just all the more heartbreaking, and even the story of Claudia, right, and what she represents for Rice, it's just, yeah, it's just all the more poignant. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, published in 1976, and I'm comparing it with the movie from 1994, directed by Neil Jordan. And the reason I am covering this is because it won a book versus movie poll that I posted, so it is what my subscribers wanted to see me cover. And if you are not yet a subscriber, definitely click that subscribe button so that you can be notified when the next book versus movie poll goes up, which will be very soon. And then this has been readapted more recently into a TV show, so the first season aired in 2022, and I have watched the first season so far. I do plan on watching the rest, I just haven't gotten to it yet, but I will have a follow-up video sharing my thoughts on the TV show, so stay tuned for that. And there is a lot to get into with the TV show because they made so many changes, which I was surprised by, but yeah, I will save that for that video, which will be coming out soon. But as far as the book and the 90s movie go, I'm just going to dive right in, so we are getting into spoilers right off the bat. So the interview happening is between vampire Louis and this random guy he meets in San Francisco. And so he tells him his 200-year life story. And we hear that he was alive in the 1700s and he ran a plantation in Louisiana. And in the book, he had a brother who was very religious and he wanted to become a priest. And Louis was all on board for him becoming a priest. However, the brother eventually starts to see visions. And this is when Louis, he kind of draws the line because he's like, you know, I believe in saints and visions, but I don't believe my own brother is capable of having them. And so he basically tells his brother to like put a stop to this nonsense. And the way he treats his brother causes his brother to commit suicide. Whereas in the movie, he doesn't have a brother who wants to be a priest and who sees visions. Instead, we hear that he had a wife and child who recently passed away. But in both, the death of his, brother / his wife and child, it causes him to be depressed and reckless and not care about his life anymore. And this is when Lestat, a vampire, finds him and offers to make him into a vampire as well. And Louis was a grown man who could weigh the pros and cons of a decision like this. And so Lestat could say like, hey, like I gave you a choice. But at the same time, like Louis, he was not in the right frame of mind to be making a decision like this. And also he didn't fully realize what it would mean to be a vampire, right? So like maybe he let it happen, but did he really have a choice? I feel like Lestat just kind of forced it on him in a way and made it seem like he was giving him a choice. And also the way you make someone a vampire is you drink them to the brink of death, and then when they're on the brink of death, the vampire then feeds them their own blood, and that turns the human into a vampire. And so also, Lestat had drank from Louis previously, and so Louis is also drained from not having all of his blood in him, combined with the fact that he was depressed and drinking and stuff. And so, yeah, Lestat might claim he gave him a choice, but I feel like he didn't really. But in both, once Louis is a vampire, he hates having to kill humans to live, and so he therefore stops killing people and instead drinks the blood of animals. However, not giving in to who he is just causes him to have even more inner turmoil than when he would kill people but feel bad about it. And like I said, Louis runs a plantation, and so once he is turned into a vampire, Lestat comes to live on the plantation with him. However, in both book and movie, the slaves start to know that like something is up with these two guys and something is wrong with them. And long story short, the plantation is set on fire and Louis and Lestat leave to go live in New Orleans. And through the decades, Louis begins to despise Lestat for a variety of reasons. For one, Lestat is always dangling the fact that like, oh, there's so much you don't know about being a vampire, like you still have so much to learn, implying that he is going to be the one to teach Louis. And yet he is very withholding with the information, and he also just doesn't seem to have the answers that Louis wants. And so Louis starts to think like, I don't think this guy has as much to teach me as he's claiming. But also Lestat, Louis doesn't like killing people, whereas Lestat is on the opposite end, where not only does he not feel bad about killing people, he also loves to toy with them and torment them before finally finishing them off, and Louis just finds this repulsive. And of Lestat in the book, Louis says, being a vampire for him meant revenge against life itself. Every time he took a life, it was revenge. It was no wonder then that he appreciated nothing. The nuances of vampire existence were even available to him because he was focused with a maniacal vengeance upon the mortal life he'd left. Consumed with hatred, he looked back. Consumed with envy, nothing pleased him unless he could take it from others. And once having it, he grew cold and dissatisfied, not loving the thing for itself. And so he went after something else. Vengeance, blind and sterile and contemptible. And in the movie, we don't know how old Lestat is. However, in the book, we know that he can't be that old because his own birth father is still alive. And one of the reasons he turns Louis into a vampire is because he likes Louis's plantation and he wants somewhere where he and his father can live, like somewhere nice. And then also, Lestat in the book is not good with money. And so it isn't until he teams up with Louis, who is really good at investing, you know, like Lestat will steal money, but then he doesn't do anything with it once he's stolen it, aside from spend it. Whereas with Louis's help, Lestat can give Louis the money he steals, and then Louis knows how to invest and knows what to do with it in order to make them rich. But yeah, so Lestat and the father live with Louis on this plantation, and the father is blind, and he doesn't know that his son is a vampire. And so when they have dinner, the blind father is eating, and then Louis and Lestat just make dinner noises pretending to eat. And this is one of the things that tips the slaves off because they see these guys pretending to eat with empty plates, not eating anything. And in the book, Lestat's father does eventually die, and Lestat, like, he cares enough for his father to provide a place for him to live, but he is very cruel and cold to him. And even when the father is on his deathbed, Lestat is still just very cruel to him, and he's telling Louis to just like hurry and kill my dad, like let's get this over with. But when he is on his deathbed, the father is apologizing to Lestat for what he did to him, because we find out that, and this is unique to the book, we do not see this in the movie, but in the book we find out that Lestat had been a scholar and he wanted to go to school, but the father put a stop to it, and so the father is apologizing for this. And so through Lestat's father, we do get a glimpse into his past life, but for the most part we learn very little about Lestat in both book and movie. But one detail I did like about Lestat in the book is how Louis talks about how, and we kind of see this in the movie because we see him playing the piano and stuff, but in the book more specifically, we hear how he loves to go to the opera and to the theater, and he loves music, both the performing of it as well as the listening to it. And in these moments, Louis actually likes being around Lestat, and he talks about how when they would walk home from a play, Lestat would just be in this euphoric mood and he would be quoting the play. And I don't know, I really liked this glimpse into Lestat, and I could just really picture him in my mind just like repeating the Shakespeare and being just like so taken with the theater and the opera. And we kind of get a glimpse of that in the movie, but not quite to the same extent. But to go along with that, there is a part in both book and movie when Lestat is talking to Louis and Claudia being someone I will get to shortly, but he kind of threatens them, being like, I found someone who would make a better vampire than either one of you. But in the book, we hear more about this person, and it is a musician who Lestat has befriended. And every night when Lestat goes to see this guy, he tells Louis like, oh, I'm gonna kill him tonight. And then he goes to see him and he comes back the next day and he has not killed him. And so it turns into like this Dread Pirate Robert situation where each night he's like, oh, I'm gonna kill the musician tonight. And then he never does, because he can't bring himself to kill him because he just likes his music too much, and this guy just has so much talent. And so now at this point, we hear that Lestat is considering turning him into a vampire, or at least threatening to do so. But to talk about Claudia, so for a long time, Louis just drinks animal blood. However, at one point, he just can no longer resist. And it's when he finds a young girl crying over her dead mother, and he picks up the girl, and yeah, he can't resist biting her, and so he does. And this is when Lestat walks in and finds him, and Lestat makes him ashamed and embarrassed for having finally drank human blood and the blood of this young girl. And so Louis drops the girl and he walks off. And Lestat knows that Louis wants to leave him and that he's getting tired of him. And so in order to get Louis to stay, he takes this girl and he turns her into a vampire. And her name is Claudia, and both Lestat and Louis love her, and Louis decides to stay with Lestat for Claudia's sake. And Claudia and Lestat bond in killing, as she has no hesitation in doing this. And she and Louis bond over more philosophical things, and in general, she and Louis just have a deeper connection. And as she matures, it's interesting because she is a very different vampire than both Louis and Lestat, due to the fact that she was so young when she was turned. And as she gets older, she has no recollection of her human life. So she is like a more pure vampire, you could say. And I just gotta say that this was Kirsten Dunst's breakout performance. She was 11 years old, and she She is absolutely incredible. I have talked about her a few different times. For example, I mentioned her in my Little Women video, and she did Little Women right after Interview with a Vampire. And so she's just so good in both of those movies, and the characters are so different, right? But yeah, she is amazing in that. And then The Virgin Suicides, she's fantastic. Power of the Dog. And then Civil War, she was in just earlier this year. And so like, no matter how old she is, if you're watching a movie with Kirsten Dunst, you know she is going to be incredible. And yeah, she was definitely the highlight of Interview with the Vampire. But yeah, for a while, things are happy with the three of them now that they have Claudia. But as the decades pass, she starts to mature mentally, yet she stays looking like a child. And so she begins to resent them for doing this to her because she will forever look like a 5-year-old. And so she will therefore never know true independence because she can never just head out on her own, right? Because she will always have to have an adult companion with her. And so as she starts to question things and wonder why she isn't aging, and she asks Louis, like, how did I even become a vampire? And so he tells her, and she resents both of them because Louis is the one who bit her, right? Lestat would not have turned her had Louis not bit her. So she is angry at both of them, but Lestat is the one that she is really just, she has such contempt for him. And she also resents the fact that she and Louis feel like they have to stay with him, like they're trapped with this vampire that they don't like. And so she decides that she is going to kill him. And in the book, initially, she and Louis made plans to go to Europe, just the two of them, and just leave Lestat. But Louis knows, and Claudia knows too, obviously, because she ends up killing him. But Louis, as they're making these plans to just leave Lestat and not tell him, he knows that they won't be able to just leave him and that it's, you know, it's easier said than done. And so they're making plans, but Louis is just like, I don't know how we'll ever leave him. Like, he's not going to let that happen. He's going to find out. Like, he just knows it won't be easy, basically. And yeah, Claudia knows it won't be easy either. And so she eventually tricks him. She acts like she's making amends because the two of them have had such animosity against each other for a while now because of her contempt towards him. And so she tells him that she wants to make amends with him by giving him a gift of 2 sleeping twins, but they are not sleeping. She has actually killed them. And Lestat had told them that drinking the blood of the dead is how a vampire can die. And so that is how Claudia knows this. And so Lestat ends up drinking the blood of one of them. And when he starts having a reaction from this blood, she then slits his throat. And then once his body is dead, they dump him in the swamp. And so once Lestat is gone, the two of them are preparing to officially leave for Europe. However, the night they are going to leave, who shows up at their house but Lestat, who turns out he isn't dead. He was put in like a weakened state, and his body is very scarred and it looks, you know, malformed in a way. But yeah, he wasn't officially dead. And so he now returns. In the movie, it is just Lestat, but in the book, he turned that musician into a vampire. So the musician and Lestat come back in the book. And so in order to get away from Lestat, they set the place on fire, and then they're able to run out of the building and catch their ship. And they just assume that Lestat and the musician died in the fire. And then in the movie, through voiceover, we are told that they travel through Eastern Europe looking for vampires. Also, Claudia, she really wants to go to Europe because she has been reading a lot about vampires. And it seems like Europe is where they are. And so that is why she wants to go there so badly. And so yeah, they go to Eastern Europe. And in the movie, we're told in voiceovers that they search Eastern Europe, but have no luck finding a vampire. Whereas in the book, this isn't the case because they show up in Eastern Europe and locals know of vampires. And so they hear about it and they're like, ooh, like, okay, the locals are scared of vampires. This is good. And there's this whole scene where they go to an inn and there is this guy, a non-local, who is there, and his wife has been killed by a vampire. And so the locals want to behead her body because that is how you kill vampires. And they're worried that since a vampire bit her, they're worried that she will now turn into one. And so they want to behead her. And the guy is so upset because he doesn't want them doing this to her body. And it's this whole thing. But from here, Claudia and Louis, they go and they find the vampires. However, these vampires are like these brain dead zombie-esque versions of a vampire who are very easy to kill. And they come across these types of vampires a number of times and they just are disappointed, right? That they're just these brain dead creatures, essentially. And so after finding a number of these vampires that are all alike, they then decide to ditch Eastern Europe and go to Paris. And while in Paris, Louis is eventually contacted by Armand, who he learns is the oldest vampire, being 400 years old. And Louis and Claudia are invited to a theater where these vampires, like Armand and his group, they put on these shows for humans. So they are vampires pretending to be human, playing that they are vampires drinking the blood of someone. And Louis and Claudia, they can see that the woman is not an actor and that they truly are drinking her blood. But the human audience thinks that it's all just a show. And Louis doesn't like the performance because he still feels pity for humans. So he can't enjoy it because he feels so bad for this woman. And then Claudia doesn't like it just because she thinks it's in poor taste. But Louis, when he meets Armand, like the two of them have this instant connection. And so Claudia sees this. Also, Armand can speak telepathically to people, and he is the only vampire in this story who can do that. And so he speaks to Claudia telepathically while talking to Louis. But basically, when they get home, Claudia, she's worried about her future because she's like, you are drawn to Armand. Armand wants you, but Armand doesn't want me around. But she can't be alone, right? So she needs a companion. So she's like, if you go with Armand, like what's going to happen to me? And then on top of this, the vampires in Armand's group, they also are suspicious of Claudia and Louis because they will not name the vampire that turned them, and they think that's weird. But then also the fact that Claudia is a vampire who looks like a 5-year-old, like they know that you should never turn someone that young, and so they just find her very unsettling to be around. But eventually Claudia meets a doll maker named Madeline, and so Madeline has lost her own daughter in real life, and so she's very drawn to Claudia. And so when she finds out that she can be turned into a vampire and she can be Claudia's forever mother, essentially, she's all on board for that. However, Claudia doesn't have the strength to turn someone, and so she is able to convince Louis to do this for her. That way, Louis can go be with Armand, and Claudia will have Madeline as her lifetime companion. And prior to him turning Madeline, Claudia got to the point where she hated Louis. Like, she hated who he was and how he was so passive, and also the fact that he had so much power that she wishes she could have, and yet she doesn't have that power because, thanks to Louis and Lestat, she got turned at such a young age. And so she's like, oh, like, just everything you have, like, why couldn't I have what you have? And like, imagine what I could do if I only had your strength, if I was only a full-grown vampire, you know? And so she starts to hate him. However, once he turns Madeline, she then forgives him. And we read in the book, this is Louis talking. He says, I understand for the first time in my life what she feels when she forgives me for being myself, whom she says she hates and loves. She feels almost nothing. And I thought that was a great line. Like, the best Claudia can hope to feel is nothing. Like, wow, that's depressing. But shortly after he turns Madeline, in the movie, it is literally right after he turns Madeline. Whereas in the book, Madeline, she's a vampire for a little while. And, you know, the three of them are together. And Madeline is also like kind of crazy in the book. But she doesn't last too long because soon after she is turned, Armand's vampire group, Armand isn't with them, but his group of vampires come and they kidnap Claudia, Madeline, and Louis. Because in the book, Lestat has shown up and he has proven what they suspected, which is that Claudia tried to kill him. And it is illegal. Like, that is the one law you have to abide by when you're a vampire, is that you don't kill other vampires. And so when they find out that Claudia attempted to kill Lestat and Lestat is there for revenge, they go and get Claudia and they're going to kill her and Madeline. And Louis, they're going to bury alive so that he will slowly die. Whereas in the movie, Lestat is not there. And so this group of vampires, they just kidnap them just because of what they suspect Claudia and Louis have done, but they don't actually have any hard evidence. And I don't know why they didn't have Lestat show up in the movie. Like, I read that they filmed a scene with him showing up, but then they cut it. And I didn't like this change. I liked that Lestat shows up in Paris and he is the reason that Claudia ends up dying. But yeah, the movie, he wasn't even there. But regardless, so they bury Louis alive, and then Claudia and Madeline, they put in this chamber which has like this open air. And so once the daylight comes, it's inevitable the sun will shine on them, and then she and Madeline will turn to ash. But Louis is buried alive. However, Armand shows up and is able to save Louis, and then once he escapes, he sees that Claudia is dead, and he is of course heartbroken. And in the book, he also sees that Lestat is also mourning the death of Claudia because he did care about her, right? Even if he is the one who caused her to die. But regardless, so yeah, now Louis is heartbroken, and after this, he sets the vampire theater on fire and he kills all of the vampires inside except for Armand. In the book, he warned Armand that he was going to do something like this. In the movie, we don't see him warn Armand, like maybe he did, but we didn't actually see it. And then after this in the book, he and Armand then pair up and then they travel the world together for decades. Whereas in the movie, he sees Armand afterwards and Armand like wants him to join him. But Louis, he can see that he has nothing left to learn from Armand, but he also just can't forgive Armand for allowing his group of vampires to do what they did. And so in the movie, he leaves Armand and goes off on his own. But yeah, in the book, so he's with Armand and they travel the world for decades, like I said, before eventually Louis decides that he is ready to return to New Orleans. And once he is like dead set on returning, Armand confesses to him like, so Lestat didn't die in the vampire theater fire like you think he did. He was already out and he survived, and people speculate that he is back in New Orleans. And Armand doesn't want Louis going to go see him. However, once they are there, without Armand knowing, Louis does go see Lestat, and he sees that Lestat is dying because he won't drink human blood. In the movie, when he sees Lestat, he is alone, whereas in the book, he was with other people, like other vampires, that were trying to get Lestat to drink human blood, but he wouldn't. And so he sees Louis, and he begs for Louis's forgiveness and wants Louis to stay with him because he misses Louis and he loved Louis. But Louis says that he's not there to return to him. And in the movie, they do have a similar conversation. However, Lestat begging Louis's forgiveness made more sense in the book, right? Because he was the cause of Claudia's death in many ways. And so, I mean, in the movie, sure, he still has stuff he could apologize for, but I thought this conversation made more sense in the book since he was there in Paris. But regardless, Louis leaves, you know, this weak and dying Lestat, and he returns to Armand in the book. And Armand, when he finds out he's gone to see Lestat, Armand gets very nervous and he's worried about what Lestat told him. And this is when Armand reveals that Armand is the one who shut Claudia and Madeline in that room where they were going to die. However, at this point, Louis, he has become kind of emotionally empty, and he sort of isn't bothered when he finds this out, or maybe he kind of already speculated it anyway, and so he almost doesn't even care. However, he is getting tired of Armand, and so he is kind of wanting Armand to leave. And they end up having this conversation where Louis tells him that when they met, he thought Armand was strong and powerful and without regret, which are things he admired, and that's what drew him to Armand. But then he goes on to say, "But you were a destroyer, just as I was a destroyer, more ruthless and cunning even than I. You showed me the only thing that I could really hope to become, what depth of evil, what degree of coldness I would have to attain to end my pain, and I accepted that. And so that passion, that love you saw in me was extinguished. And you see now simply a mirror of yourself." And then from here, Armand gets up and walks away, never to see Louis again. And then at the end of the interview, because Louis is literally being interviewed by someone, and so after he has told his life story, he tells the person that basically he's learned that life has no meaning. Like, he has a very jaded view of life. And the interviewer is upset and he's like, "What? Like, that can't be how things end." And then he asks to be turned into a vampire himself. And Louis, he is like, "What? Like, clearly you haven't learned from me, because this has been a cautionary tale. So if now you want to become a vampire, clearly you've learned nothing." But then the interviewer tells Louis how he can, meaning Louis can no longer remember what mortality was like. And so Louis no longer realizes how amazing it would be to have what Louis has. And so he's asking him to be turned. But Louis doesn't turn him though, and he just, like, he attacks him and threatens him, and then he leaves. And at the end of the book, the interviewer is on his way to go find Lestat. And so we can assume that the next book in the series is the interviewer interviewing Lestat, I guess. Whereas in the movie, the interviewer leaves in his car and he is playing the recording of Louis when Lestat comes up from the back seat, and he still is in that starving state, but then he feeds on the interviewer and he is renewed, and he then implies that he will turn the interviewer into a vampire, and that is how the movie ends. And I loved the ending of this movie. Like, these last few minutes were fantastic. Cruz is great through this whole movie, and yeah, this end scene was amazing. And then I'm actually just going to play the clip because Tom Cruise is so good. You need to see this for yourself.
Most of all, I longed for death. I invited it. A release from the pain of living.
Oh, Louis.
Is open to anyone.
Still whining, Louis.
To the pimp that followed.
Have you heard enough?
But it was a...
I've had to listen to that for centuries.
And I wish they would have made a sequel with Lestat, because the first half of the movie with him was so much better in my opinion than the second half without him. And then yeah, this final scene, like, it made me want more. And it's funny because Anne Rice was initially upset with the casting of Tom Cruise because she was like, he is all wrong for this part. He can't do this. However, once she saw the movie, she saw how amazing he was and she wrote him a thorough apology. And then from here on out, she did nothing but praise the movie and praise Tom Cruise. And honestly, as far as the cast goes, I would say that Brad Pitt is the weak link here. Like, he's not bad, but Kirsten Dunst is fantastic. Tom Cruise is amazing. And then Brad Pitt is just okay. And Antonio Banderas, he plays Armand, and he's good too, but Armand in general isn't as interesting a character as those main three. And yeah, the second half of the movie, what saves that from being an absolute bore is the performance by Kirsten Dunst. And to go through just some more of the changes between the two, I've already covered some of them, but to talk about some more things that the movie does not include from the book. So in the book, when they're living on the plantation, there is someone in a nearby plantation that Lestat wants to kill. And ultimately he does end up killing this guy, but then Louis feels bad for the guy's sister, whose name is Babette. So then he goes to meet with her and she thinks he's some kind of spirit, and he meets with her at different points in her life, giving her guidance and advice, which she takes, and it helps her to be successful and thrive in life despite the death of her brother. And then in the book, after they burn their own plantation, they both go to Babette's plantation and she gives them a place to stay for the night. However, she realizes that he is not who she thought he was, and she says that he is of the devil and she is freaked out by him. And they end up leaving, but long story short, Babette kind of goes crazy once she finds out the truth about Louis. And there is a lot of talk of religion in this book and movie, and Louis wondering, like, am I of the devil or am I not? Like, does God exist? Does evil exist? Trying to figure things out. Like, he's having like an existential crisis, right, through so much of this book. And in the movie, we kind of touched on this too, but again, the book just dives into this even more. And there are so many like philosophical religious discussions where Louis is trying to just kind of figure things out. And I listened to Ink to Film. They are a book versus movie podcast too. And I listened to their book episode for this. And in it, they share like about Anne Rice's life, which I thought was really interesting. And they talked about how Anne Rice, her spiritual journey, she was constantly kind of going back and forth, or not back and forth. Her spiritual journey was just always changing, I guess you could say, because she was raised Christian, then she became an atheist, then she became a Christian again, but then from there she decided to become a Christian who doesn't belong to an organized religion, and just kind of switching around, trying to figure out her own religious beliefs. And I love hearing about people who have a spiritual journey like that, because I can very much relate, because that is how I feel. I feel like I'm always like trying to figure it out and trying to decide, like, do I want to be part of this? Do I want to be part of that? Like, what do I believe? And I do have some like core beliefs, but then a lot of other things, I feel like I'm just always wavering. And so I like hearing about other people who have a similar experience. But then another thing they shared on that podcast is they talked about how Anne Rice herself had a daughter who died when the daughter was only 4 years old. And Anne Rice was a collector of porcelain dolls. And so Madeline, the porcelain doll maker who lost a daughter who wants to be a mother to Claudia, clearly she is kind of a stand-in for Anne Rice. And so when you know Anne Rice's own background, the story of Madeline is just all the more heartbreaking. And even the story of Claudia, right, and what she represents for Rice, it's just, yeah, it's just all the more poignant. And also in the book and movie, which this is like implied in the movie, I guess, and in the book we straight up hear this, that vampires do not have sex. And when they have this like sexual tension built up, the way it's released is when they feed. And when Claudia asks Louis what sex was like, he tells her that it's like feeding, but far less intense. So feeding is just like even better than sex. And that's it for them, basically. And the book and movie obviously have a lot of gay elements with Louis and Lestat, and then Lestat and that musician I mentioned, and then Armand and Louis. But it's interesting because there is no sex, and the only intimacy shared with each other is when they feed together. And also when they bite someone, the person often doesn't realize what is happening because they are in such ecstasy, because to be bit is also like, you know, it's also sexual. And it isn't until they see the blood that they realize something is wrong. And also, speaking of blood, in the book, the vampires cry tears of blood, which makes sense because that's the only fluid in their body. Whereas in the movie, they just cry regular tears. And then also in the book, it's interesting because Louis says, he might have said this in the movie too, but he says that he never fully appreciated humanity until he became immortal and was no longer human. And that's partly what makes it so hard for him to kill humans, is that now he has this new appreciation for them. And the idea that Louis views this vampire life as a curse, yet others like Armand view it as a gift. Like, I feel like this could represent a lot of different things, just that right there. And, you know, you have the Parisian vampires that are very open and proud of who they are, whereas Louis is very ashamed and he has this self-loathing. And then you have Claudia, who on one hand embraces what she is, and yet once she is older, she realizes that she had no agency in that choice and that decision, and she resents what was done to her at such a young age. And then Lestat is clearly someone with a traumatic past. And then when he was turned into a vampire, he embraced that killing and the death in a sadistic way, and the way he treats it is also partly what turned Louis off to killing people. And so Louis wonders this, and the reader can't help but wonder what Louis's vampire life would have been like, especially early on. Like, would he have resisted killing humans for so long if he had been turned by a different vampire who wasn't so sadistic, you know? But a quote I really liked that I think gives a lot of insight into Louis is when he is reflecting about how he got swept up by Lestat, and we read, "I allowed myself to forget how totally I had fallen in love with Lestat's iridescent eyes, that I'd sold my soul for a many-colored and luminescent thing, thinking that a highly reflective surface conveyed the power to walk on water. What would Christ need have done to make me follow him like Matthew or Peter, dress well to begin with, and have a luxurious head of pampered yellow hair?" And when it comes to book versus movie, so this book, Anne Rice does have very beautiful writing, and she's obviously very skilled, and anyone who is just like obsessed with the writing style, I wouldn't say anything against that. Like, I can totally see it. And yet, while I was reading it, there were parts, and you know, part of this is because the book is so descriptive, but also there's certain plot details, plot events that just felt so unnecessary. And so while parts of it I was so like enraptured by, other parts I was just kind of like, okay, like, can we get a move on now? But something with this book that is worth noting is that this might be the first book that is like sympathetic to the vampire's viewpoint, which obviously spurred countless other books and series. But I do really like, though, that even though she is being sympathetic to the vampire in some ways and showing them as being more complex and not just this cold, murderous thing, at the same time, she doesn't shy away from the violence of this life, right? And the movie doesn't shy away from it either. There are some moments, like especially when he is burning the theater on fire and he's like killing the vampires that show up that are trying to escape. They like really don't hold back in those scenes. And so I did like that aspect. But yeah, the movie, it does leave out a lot from the book, but the only thing that I was bothered by that they didn't keep is Lestat being in Paris when Claudia dies. I thought that was like a key part, is that he shows up there, you know? And so I really wish they had kept that. But aside from Lestat being in Paris, the other things they kept out, I didn't miss at all. Like even Lestat's dad, I was fine with him not being there. The stuff with Eastern Europe, the stuff with Babette, that dream sequence Louis has in the church, like so many things in the book that I did not miss in the movie. And when it comes to book versus movie, I will say that the movie wins because I just enjoyed it more and I would definitely watch it again. Whereas the book, I don't think I would ever read it again. And like I said, I feel like there were parts of the book where it just was kind of slow going, and I was just kind of like the stuff in Eastern Europe when he's in that inn talking to the guy whose wife died, stuff like that. I'm just like, okay, Babette, like, okay, let's get going. Maybe someone else could explain why those scenes were more important than I think they were. But yeah, the movie just kind of trims it down. And while again, I definitely preferred the first half over the second half, I would definitely watch this movie again. And Kirsten Dunst and Tom Cruise give standout performances, and they would be the reason I would want to return to this. And yeah, that wraps it up on Interview with the Vampire. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And as I have said, stay tuned for my video coming up soon where I talk about season 1 of the show. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.